vote.
Ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, if you ask the Trump administration of their highest spending priority in terms of their budget, it's pretty clear: national defense. Over and over, the President has asked, and Congress has voted for, more money for America's military, for operations, readiness, investment across the board. I don't think there's any question that the votes reflect the bipartisan commitment to our military, and believe that spending the dollars today to train our men and women, to equip them properly, and to make sure they live in the best circumstances is in the best interests of America's future. We've done that year in and year out. But this year, we're facing quite a challenge from the Trump administration. You see, this notion of building a $5.7 billion wall is going to be paid for at the expense of the United States military. It's the military that will end up surrendering projects that are underway, investments in our troops that are underway, so that the President can build this almighty wall of his that was supposed to be paid for by the Mexicans, right? I heard him say that. Oh, only 100 times, but I heard him say it. Now he's off of that. It won't be the Mexicans paying for the President's wall, it will be our military. And so we ought to be very honest about the vote that's coming up. President Trump has decided to declare an emergency and to say that regardless of the Constitution's giving authority to Congress to appropriate funds, he wants to take on that responsibility to decide where funds will be spent. That'll be challenged in court, I'm sure, and it should be. But for those members of the Senate who in a few days will be asked to vote, I'd like them to reflect on two things. Their vote supporting the President's approach is basically giving the authority of this branch of government away to the executive. Make no mistake, that's at the heart of it. And a number of Republican senators, a handful, have stood up and said, we wouldn't have allowed this under a Democratic president. Why would we allow it under a Republican president? Yet others have said they're prepared to look the other way. If this president is popular back in their home states, the Constitution comes in second. I think that's a mistake. Secondly, though, members of the Senate, before they cast this vote, giving this president the authority to take money out of our military to build this wall, ought to stop and take a look about where the money's coming from within our military. I'm in a fortunate position to be the ranking member on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. It's the biggest appropriations job on Capitol Hill, and I'm happy to have Senator Shelby, the Republican from Alabama, as my chairman of the subcommittee. I'm the ranking Democrat on that committee. We have the biggest appropriation bill when it comes to discretionary spending, some 60% of the federal discretionary budget, and we know how important it is to get it right. America never wants to come in second in a war, and we certainly never want to be in a position where we're mistreating or ignoring the needs of our men and women in uniform. So each year we go through their requests and try to make sure the most important things are funded. And the military will tell us there are certain things that are essential and timely, and we need you to spend money on them. And we have responded, not just in the subcommittee, full committee, but in the Senate and the House. Now comes the president and says, not so. The money we told you was so critically important this year, we're going to take that money and spend it on the Mexican border to extend the wall, $5.7 billion worth of it. And what we've done, as I've met with the heads of the branches of our military service, is to ask basic questions. I did yesterday to several who came before me, several generals and secretaries, and I said, has the administration sat down with you in terms of your branch of the military and told you where they're going to take the money to build the wall? And consistently, the answer is no. They don't know. And we are days or weeks away from that money being taken. What we've done is to prepare a chart through the Military Construction Subcommittee, which is chaired by Senator Bozeman, a Republican from Arkansas, Senator Schatz, a Democrat from Hawaii, and ask them, where are the unobligated funds? These are funds, unobligated projects, I should say. These are projects which have been authorized, but they haven't been started. They may have had basic engineering, preliminary estimates, and so forth. They're ready to let a contract, so the money is sitting there, ready to move forward. And these are the funds, these are the projects, I should say, that are the target list for President Trump. when it comes to cutting the military to pay for his border wall. And we have a long list here, and the list includes almost every state, certainly every state that has anything near a military facility. I look in the state of Illinois, has several key projects that we consider to be essential. One in Peoria, Illinois, it's a fire crash and rescue station which needs to be upgraded for the safety of the men and women who work there and those who use that important airport, and other things within our state. But as I said, hardly any state is omitted from this list. So any senator who is voting to give this president the authority to cut military projects, to stop the spending on military projects, should realize that it may come home and require an explanation. The presiding officer from the state of Oklahoma, I tell him that of the list here, 4 of the projects are in Oklahoma that are on the target list, hit list for cuts if the president decides to cut those projects or Illinois projects to fund this wall. I have 2 or 3 specific ones I'd like to highlight today because they came to my attention and I thought it would be a shame. In fact, it would be just plain wrong for us to cut the spending on these projects. Let me tell you about one of them that struck me at first. The Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps came to see me. He is a no-nonsense man. You can understand if you come to be a 4-star general in the Marine Corps, you get down to business in a hurry. And we talked about some of the damage that was done at one of the premier training facilities for the U.S. Marine Corps. Last year, Hurricane Florence tore through the state of North Carolina. The Marine Corps happened to be one of the victims of that violent storm. The hurricane damaged roughly 800 buildings on base at Camp Lejeune, New River, and Cherry Point. Here's a kind of overhead shot, which is not as graphic because it was taken after the hurricane, but the blue coverings on the tops of these roofs are an indication of damage, structural damage that was done to these buildings. And as I mentioned, 800 buildings on these bases were impacted and damaged by this hurricane. This overhead shot taken last month indicates work that needs to be done before these buildings can be successfully inhabited by the Marine Corps and their families. The Camp Lejeune Chapel, incidentally, I have a photo of that too. There's not much left of it. It's an indication of the damage that was done there. This one worker was walking outside of the chapel. That's what's left of the chapel. Insulation's falling from the ceiling. There's no good reason to prolong the cleanup. As the Marine Corps said, they want to get down to work as quickly as possible and restore this training facility for the good of the Marine Corps and for our nation. But this is on the hit list for the president for the wall at the border. What else needs attention this year? The United States Air Force needs $750 million to begin cleaning up Tyndall Air Force Base, leveled by Hurricane Michael. The Army leaders need $1 billion for everything from more training to jump-starting new technology to keep our troops safe and effective in the battlefield. The Navy has asked for hundreds of millions of dollars of additional dollars for unexpected ship maintenance. We can't afford to shortchange the men and women in the Navy. We saw what happened not that long ago with the fatal accidents involving Navy maneuvers and exercises. We never want that to happen again. The National Guard has 2,100 personnel on the border, but it's starting to run low in its pay account. So it was hoping some of these unobligated funds, at least a small part of them, might be used so they can continue their border mission. Unless the Department of Defense finds $150 to $300 million this year, the National Guard will have to cut short its summer trainings in all 50 states. My subcommittee has identified almost $5 billion in military priorities that need attention today. But after President Trump takes half of that, $2.5 billion, to pay for his border wall, which priorities will get cut? The president has also decided to cut or delay $3.6 billion in military construction projects. The president might not think these projects are timely or important, but it was just weeks or months ago when the administration said just the opposite and asked Congress to appropriate money. Examples: $800 million for essential training facilities like the National Guard readiness centers, simulators and firing ranges in the states of Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, and Montana, to name a few. $1.4 billion worth of maintenance-related projects, such as aircraft hangars and vehicle maintenance shops in Arkansas, Indiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma, not to mention many other states affected. $1 billion worth of projects for medical and dental care facilities for the men and women in uniform, schools for military families, military barracks, and other essential facilities in Arizona, Missouri, Texas, and beyond. Fort Campbell, Kentucky needs a new middle school for military children. The current building dates back to 1967 and is in serious disrepair. We were told that was a priority, but it could be stopped, cut, eliminated if we're not careful to build this wall. Also on this list is a new rifle range at Parris Island, South Carolina, a training base for 20,000 new Marines every single year. There's a new training center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to provide top-notch training and prevent injuries among our special forces. They're using an old warehouse right now, and they want a modern facility. If it were your son or daughter serving our military at Fort Bragg, you'd give them nothing less. The list goes on and on. Are we really going to tell our military, the very people who are protecting and defending this nation, that the needs they have identified and we have appropriated money for are going to be put on hold because President Trump made a campaign promise that he can't keep, that the Mexicans were going to build the wall? Republicans and Democrats in the Senate should join the House in rejecting the President's emergency declaration. The Senate should reject any effort by the President to take money from our troops, from the military, from the Marines, from the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the National Guard units, to build this wall. We may not agree on much, but we used to agree on one fundamental thing. Department of Defense was a priority. The men and women serving there deserve not only our gratitude, but the investment in their training, operations, readiness, and way of life that shows our respect for what they're doing in service to this country. We could do nothing less. And when we face the vote, quite likely a week from today or tomorrow, on whether we agree with the House, I hope that the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, will put the national defense of our nation first, our military first, and vote no on President Trump's effort to extend this emergency designation and try to assume constitutional responsibilities beyond what is already written. We are a branch of government. Article 1 of the Constitution, our responsibility is to appropriate funds. When we give away that responsibility, we walk away from the reason we were elected. I hope that members on both sides of the aisle will consider that as we face this historic vote, and I yield the floor.